There is a moment in every person's life when they discover an uncomfortable truth. The world is always watching your reactions, far more than your intentions. Picture this. You're standing in a room where the temperature feels a little too warm, not because of the air, but because all eyes have shifted toward you. Someone has just accused you of something you didn't do, or insulted you in a way they knew would sting. And before you even process what's happening, your heartbeat rises, your face tightens, your voice sharpens. You react. Instantly, uncontrollably, emotionally. And in that one split second, something invisible happens. You lose the frame. Not because you were wrong, but because you were triggered. This is the quiet psychological paradox most people never recognize. When you cannot control your emotions, someone else can. Not through force, but through the delicate strings they now know how to pull. Now imagine the opposite. Someone insults you, and you don't flinch. Someone provokes you, and your face remains calm. Someone pressures you, baits you, tests you, and you stay centered, unreadable, untouchable. Suddenly, the power dynamic shifts. They become uncertain. They become reactive. They become emotional. And you simply stand there composed, almost silently communicating something Machiavelli understood centuries ago. The person who controls their emotions controls the outcome. Machiavelli never argued for cruelty or coldness. He argued for clarity. He warned that in a world driven by appearances, politics, and manipulation, your emotions are signals, and the wrong people can turn those signals into weapons. To him, the strongest individual wasn't the loudest, the bravest, or the most talented. It was the one who could be both the lion and the fox, powerful when necessary, silent when strategic, unreadable when observed. Emotional invulnerability, in Machiavelli's eyes, wasn't about suppressing your humanity. It was about protecting your center, that inner space where your judgment, intuition, and power live. Without that protection, anyone can sway you. Anyone can use you. Anyone can break you. So the question becomes, what if emotional invulnerability isn't the absence of feeling, but the mastery of it? What if the ability to remain calm in the fires of conflict is the real path to personal freedom? By the end of this video, you will understand how to become someone who cannot be manipulated, provoked, or broken, no matter who tries or how hard they push. Most people hear the name Machiavelli and imagine a cold, ruthless puppet master pulling strings from the shadows. They picture someone emotionless, calculating, detached from humanity. But this image is a modern caricature, one that misses the very essence of what Machiavelli was trying to teach. Machiavelli never told anyone to eliminate their emotions. He warned them to govern their emotions the way a skilled ruler governs a city, firmly, wisely, and without letting chaos take control. In his world, the danger wasn't feeling too much. The danger was being ruled by what you feel. In The Prince, he reveals a pattern he had witnessed repeatedly among leaders, generals, and even ordinary citizens. People who react impulsively, out of fear, anger, affection, or hope, become predictable. And predictability is the first step toward being controlled. The one who can be manipulated emotionally will eventually be defeated strategically. To Machiavelli, emotions were not weaknesses, they were tools. Anger could provide courage to confront injustice. Fear could sharpen one's perception of danger. Hope could fuel long-term vision and resilience. Affection could build alliances and loyalty, but only as long as you were holding the reins. He believed that emotions, when ungoverned, turn a person into prey, but emotions, when mastered, turn a person into someone impossible to corner. Not because they are unfeeling, but because they no longer respond in ways the world can exploit. Machiavelli admired people who could remain steady even in the most chaotic storms. leaders who refused to be provoked by insults or baited into reckless decisions. He respected individuals who did not melt under pressure or allow fear to cloud their judgment. And perhaps most importantly, he valued those who could remain untouched by flattery. Flattery, to Machiavelli, was one of the most dangerous emotional vulnerabilities. He observed that people fall for praise far more easily than threats. A threat makes you alert. A compliment makes you blind. The wrong words, spoken in just the right tone, could corrupt a king faster than an army at his gates. This is why Machiavelli's idea of emotional strength is not emotional suppression, it is emotional sovereignty. Suppression numbs you. Sovereignty frees you. Suppression locks your feelings away. Sovereignty lets you use them without being consumed by them. Machiavelli's core message was simple. If the world cannot predict you, it cannot manipulate you. If the world cannot provoke you, it cannot control you. And if the world cannot sway your emotions, you become someone who moves through it with a kind of quiet, unshakable power. This is what it truly means to become emotionally untouchable. Not to feel less, but to be mastered by nothing. Emotional manipulation doesn't begin with grand strategies or elaborate schemes. It begins with something far simpler: observation. The moment someone notices what makes you flinch, what makes you crave approval, what makes you insecure, or what makes you angry, they gain access to the switches that control your behavior. Most people don't realize how quickly this happens. You reveal yourself not through confession, but through reactions. A sigh, a delayed answer, a flash of irritation, a desperate attempt to explain yourself. Every reaction becomes data, and with enough data, someone can predict you, then control you. In relationships, this often appears as the fear of abandonment. The fear of losing someone becomes a leash that pulls you into silence, compliance, and self-sacrifice. Partners who sense this fear may begin to use it, sometimes unconsciously, withholding affection, offering conditional approval, or creating small emotional storms just to see how fast you rush to calm them. It's not always malicious, but it is manipulation, because your emotions are being used against you. In workplaces, the currency of control is status. People exploit the fear of losing position, recognition, or relevance. A boss who knows you crave validation will give you just enough praise to keep you dependent. A colleague who senses your insecurity will plant subtle doubts to keep you off balance, because the insecure worker is predictable, and the predictable worker is controllable.
Friendships carry their own form of emotional leverage. The fear of exclusion is one of the most ancient psychological triggers. Human beings are wired to avoid being cast out, and so a friend who senses that you cannot bear disapproval or distance may begin to weaponize silence, inside jokes, or selective attention. You become anxious, over-accommodating, eager to please because you fear the cost of falling out of the circle. In politics, emotional manipulation becomes industrial. Fear is amplified into mass obedience. Hope is packaged into slogans. Chaos is broadcast until a population becomes too overwhelmed to think clearly. Entire societies are steered by the emotions of millions: fear of danger, fear of the other, fear of collapse. History is full of leaders who rose to power by mastering emotional leverage, turning the public's anxieties into a staircase toward domination. Machiavelli understood this long before psychology had a name for it. Modern behavioral science confirms what Machiavelli observed centuries ago. The more reactive a person is, the easier they are to shape. Reactivity reveals weakness. Predictability reveals vulnerability. And vulnerability, when placed in the wrong hands, becomes a tool of control. Emotional manipulation works because people rarely recognize when it is happening. They think they are acting on their own free will, when in reality, they are responding to carefully pressed emotional buttons. This is why awareness is the first step toward emotional untouchability. Once you understand how shame, guilt, silence, approval, and fear are used as weapons, the spell breaks. The moment you see the pattern, you become immune to the pull. And when someone can no longer control your emotions, they can no longer control you. The world reveals itself through emotion, but the people who move through it with power rarely do. Machiavelli understood something most people never realize. Emotional transparency is a form of surrender. The moment people can read you, they can predict you. When they can predict you, they can influence you. And when they can influence you, they can control you. This section unfolds the laws, ancient in origin, modern in relevance, that govern emotional power. The first law: never reveal your full emotional landscape, not because emotions are weak, but because they are maps. When others see what hurts you, what excites you, or what unsettles you, they gain insight into your inner architecture. History is full of figures who fell because their enemies could read their fears. Modern life is no different. You lose more battles through emotional leakage than through honest mistakes. The second law: always appear composed, especially under pressure. Composure creates imbalance. It makes others tense when they expect anger and receive calm. It disrupts the emotional script they were prepared for. In courtrooms, negotiations, and political arenas, the composed figure always commands the tempo. Chaos is a weapon, but calmness is a shield that renders chaos powerless. The third law: understand every emotion before acting on it. Machiavelli insisted that impulsive action destroys strategy. Psychology calls this metacognition, the ability to observe your emotion before becoming it. Anger, when understood, becomes strength. Fear, when observed, becomes awareness. Hurt, when processed, becomes clarity. The person who cannot step outside their emotions becomes a puppet to the moment. The one who can step back becomes the architect of the outcome. The fourth law: let others reveal themselves first. People who rush to express themselves, to defend themselves, to justify themselves, expose far more than they realize. They reveal insecurities, desires, blind spots. They show where they can be influenced. When you let others speak first, you collect information. When you speak first, you give information away. Ancient strategists knew this. Modern psychologists confirm it. Those who reveal last win first. The fifth law: detach from the desire to be liked. Nothing compromises emotional strength more than the need for approval. It leads to oversharing, over-explaining, overreacting. People who crave validation become easy targets. Their emotions swing according to the opinions around them. Detachment does not mean coldness, it means independence. When you are no longer emotionally tethered to external validation, you become unpredictable and therefore unmanipulatable. The sixth law: control your reaction and you control the situation. Reaction is the currency of emotional power. Entire wars, betrayals, and political collapses have begun because someone reacted without thinking. In everyday life, the same principle applies. If you control your reaction, you decide the tone, the pace, and the terms of the interaction. Emotional control shifts the balance of power without a word spoken. These laws are not about dominating others. They are about mastering yourself so completely that no one can destabilize you. When applied in moments of betrayal, they give you clarity instead of panic. In heated arguments, they give you influence instead of vulnerability. In workplace politics, they give you strength instead of insecurity. Emotional control creates psychological asymmetry. Others expose themselves while you remain unreadable. There is a moment in every person's life when they realize that emotional pain does not come from the world, but from the meaning they attach it to it. It is in that moment that transformation begins, not with noise, but with a quiet internal shift. This shift is the birth of emotional sovereignty, the point where you stop being shaped by the world and begin shaping your response to it. The transformation starts when you stop taking things personally. Most emotional suffering is born from the belief that others' words are a reflection of your worth. But in reality, people speak from their own insecurities, projections, and fears. When you detach your identity from the opinions of others, criticism loses its sting, insults lose their poison, and praise loses its addictive pull. You begin to see interactions as data, not judgments. Then comes the shift where silence becomes your default response. Silence is not withdrawal, it is intelligence. The reactive person fills the air with explanations, defenses, and emotions. The sovereign person allows silence to do the work. They listen, observe, and decode. They understand that silence exposes truth faster than confrontation ever will. It makes manipulators reveal themselves. It makes aggressors uncertain. It makes opportunists uncomfortable. Silence is the shield that gives clarity before action.
The transformation deepens when you learn to analyze before reacting. This skill, once rare, now essential, is the difference between emotional enslavement and emotional autonomy. You begin to ask, why does this bother me? What part of my ego is triggered? What outcome do I want? This pause interrupts centuries of instinctual conditioning. It shifts you from survival mode to strategic awareness. In this space, you reclaim control over your responses and therefore your outcomes. A profound threshold is crossed when your worth no longer depends on others. Modern society conditions people to anchor their identity to external approval, likes, comments, validation, status, admiration. But emotional untouchability arises when you pull those roots out of external soil and plant them firmly inside yourself. You become your own witness. You measure your progress by your discipline, not by applause. You define your worth by your integrity, not by comparison. Then comes the final metamorphosis. Calmness becomes your natural state. Calmness is not apathy, it is mastery. It is the ability to face provocation without trembling, to face insult without shrinking, to face chaos without breaking. Psychology describes this as emotional desensitization, cognitive reframing, and ego dissolution. Philosophers call it enlightenment. Machiavelli saw it as power. Leaders across history, from Marcus Aurelius to Nelson Mandela, embodied it. Their calmness was not inherited, it was built, tested, and earned. This transformation is not about suppressing emotion, it is about reorganizing it. It is not about numbing yourself, it is about awakening to the truth that emotions are waves, and you are the ocean beneath them. Shadow work helps you confront the parts of yourself that once made you reactive. Ego detachment frees you from the need to dominate or defend. Cognitive clarity turns emotional storms into passing weather. Emotional independence turns you into someone who cannot be provoked into self-destruction. When this transformation is complete, something extraordinary happens. The world stops having power over you. Insults become irrelevant. Manipulation becomes visible. Pressure becomes manageable. You no longer bend to chaos, you walk through it. You no longer depend on validation, you generate it from within. You become emotionally untouchable, not because you hardened, but because you awakened. Emotional sovereignty is not the absence of feeling. It is the absence of fragility. It is the realization that the strongest person in any room is the one who cannot be moved from within. Emotional detachment is a powerful tool, but every powerful tool casts a shadow. There comes a moment when the discipline that once protected you begins to distance you from the very life you were trying to build. Machiavelli warned that a leader who becomes too cold eventually becomes a prisoner of his own walls. He may succeed in avoiding hurt, but he also suffocates trust, connection, and loyalty. There is a fine line between being calm in chaos and being numb to reality, and crossing that line slowly dissolves the humanity that gives strength its meaning. Strategic emotional control is rooted in awareness. It means choosing when to react, when to speak, and when to hold silence as a weapon. But emotional suppression is something else entirely. It is the habit of burying every feeling out of fear that vulnerability makes you weak. Suppression doesn't create power, it creates pressure. The more you hide, the more you lose sight of who you are beneath the armor. Machiavelli observed that rulers who became overly distrustful eventually alienated their allies, misread intentions, and created enemies where none existed. Their downfall was never caused by external threats. It was produced by the inner fracture they refused to acknowledge. People often misuse detachment as a method of manipulation. They withhold affection to maintain control. They pretend to be unbothered to appear superior. They turn silence into punishment instead of clarity. But manipulation built on insecurity always collapses. Sooner or later, the performance breaks, and what is revealed underneath is not power, but fear. Fear of losing influence, fear of being seen, fear of being abandoned. Excessive coldness corrodes relationships in subtle ways. It dries up empathy, turning every interaction into a transaction. It pushes people away not because they dislike you, but because they feel unseen around you. Loneliness grows silently in the background, disguising itself as independence. You become untouchable, yes, but in the sense that no one is able to reach you anymore. True detachment is not the absence of emotion. It is the mastery of emotion. It does not demand isolation, but clarity. It does not ask you to stop caring. It asks you to stop being controlled. Power without warmth is brittle. Strength without humanity eventually fractures. The goal is not to eliminate feeling, but to rise above the impulses that try to dictate your choices. That is where real freedom begins. In the end, everything we explored returns to a single truth. Emotional control is not a weapon you use against the world. It is the freedom that protects you from it. The entire architecture of power, from personal relationships to political empires, is built on the simple question of who controls whom. When your emotions dictate your reactions, you become predictable. You become easy to influence, easy to provoke, easy to manipulate. But when your emotions no longer pull the strings, when they rise and fall without hijacking your decisions, something extraordinary happens. You reclaim authorship over your life. Machiavelli has long been misunderstood as a prophet of cruelty, but beneath the stereotypes lies a deeper, quieter philosophy. He understood that the greatest leaders were not those who felt nothing, but those who were not ruled by feeling. They could remain steady when pressure rose, rational when chaos surrounded them, and grounded when others fell apart. His message was not to eliminate humanity, but to strengthen it by mastering the forces that so easily fracture it. Emotional independence is not an escape from the world. It is the ability to walk through the world without being captured by every demand, every judgment, every shifting expectation. It frees you from the need for validation, from the fear of disapproval, from the invisible chains of external approval. It allows you to act from intention rather than impulse, to choose direction instead of being pushed by circumstance. When your inner state becomes steadier than the chaos around you, the world begins to lose its power to shake you. This is the quiet revolution Machiavelli hinted at, a revolution that happens not in the streets, but in the mind. Power begins within. It grows from the discipline to observe your emotions without surrendering to them. It rises from the courage to remain centered when everything around you demands a reaction. And freedom begins in that same place, in the stillness where nothing inside you can be taken, disturbed, or controlled. When the noise of the world fades and your inner world remains unmoved, that is the moment you truly become free.